to spring cleaning, financial planning strategies for clients. I am Willa Williams. I am your facilitator, and I would like to introduce to you our presenter today. Our presenter is Dr. Barbara O'Neill. She's a CFP and AFC and is the owner and CEO of Money Talk Financial Planning Seminars and Publications, where she writes, speaks. Barbara is very humble, so as you say all these things about her, she shies away. She writes, speaks, and reviews content about personal finance. She's a distinguished professor emeritus at Rutgers University. She's written over 190 articles for academic publications and received national awards and over $1.2 million in grants to support her financial education programs and research. She tweets personal financial information at Money Talk 1. She writes weekly posts for her Money Talk blog. She does so much more on social media than I even could think about. And she is the author of Flipping a Switch, a book about 35 later life transitions published in 2020. So I thank you, Barbara, and introduce to you Dr. Barbara O'Neill.
Okay, thank you so much, Willa. Thank you. So this is a program that I developed in Ocala, Florida, where I live. I teach classes for a nonprofit educational foundation that serves older adults primarily. And what we passed around before is a list of all the classes that I've developed for that nonprofit foundation over the last 4 years since I started teaching there. So in case any of you need a speaker for a conference or a webinar or something like that, you can get in touch, and I'd be glad to talk to you about that. So anyway, this program came about because I realized that some of the things that I was teaching students in other classes were things that people would do occasionally. And I thought to myself, why don't I just bring everything together under one umbrella of all these things that you don't have to do them every month or even every year, every once in a while, but just, just things that you need to do occasionally that are kind of time intensive with respect to your personal finances. And I had done some research some years ago with Jing Zhao with our financial fitness quiz at Rutgers Cooperative Extension. And we found out very clearly from our research results that people tend to put off very time-intensive personal finance tasks. They're pretty good with the day-to-day, but when you talk about things like calculating net worth and cash flow and things like that, sometimes that's where people just kind of don't do those things. So what exactly is spring cleaning? And by the way, this is a shortened version of a class that runs 90 minutes. And if any of you want the full slide deck, you can get in touch with me. But this slide deck was uploaded to the conference website. So first of all, let's talk about spring cleaning. So I went to the source, Wikipedia, right? And I asked Wikipedia, I should have done ChatGPT. I could have done that too. I just came from the AI session. And I asked, what is spring cleaning? I mean, I knew what it was, but I needed a quick definition. So it talks about the practice of thoroughly cleaning your house in the springtime, particularly in cold Northeast or anywhere where it's cold in the winter months, and you just want to freshen up your house and start anew when the warm weather comes. So in a subtitle to the definition, it also mentioned that the term spring cleaning can just be used metaphorically for any time of high intensity type of activity or organizational kind of thing. So that's really what we're talking about. And then as far as financial spring cleaning, what we're talking about there is the practice of reviewing your finances and completing these occasional financial management tasks that I was talking about. We're going to go through 25 of them that I taught about in my class in Ocala. Why in the springtime? Well, for a lot of people, finances are on your mind, of course, because it's income tax season, and people have gotten kind of a refresher on their past year's finances by virtue of doing their income tax return. And also they have the documents fresh and handy. And Big reason is for most of the country, not where I live now in Florida, but in most of the country, the weather is kind of sucky in the winter months, right? You're stuck inside with snow. I mean, I heard the phrase, wintry mix yesterday, and I was like, oh my God, I want to get back to Florida. But in most of the country, it is kind of, bad weather, and you're stuck indoors. So you want to do it when you don't have all these outdoor activities that are calling out to you when the weather gets better. So spring cleaning. So we're going to go through in alphabetical order some financial spring cleaning activities. And again, these are things you don't do every day, every week, every month, but things that you want to do occasionally. And for many of them, you may not have to review them every year, but you'll certainly need to do updates as needed. By the way, I put them in alphabetical order. So we're just going to start with the A's. So the first one is an asset allocation inventory. And you all know that asset allocation is how you weight the investments that you have in your portfolio into different asset classes. So we've got stocks, fixed income securities, cash assets, maybe you've got some real estate investments, things of that sort, crypto even. So the first step to do this is net worth, and we'll get to that when we get to the ends alphabetically. But you list up all your assets, and then with the asset allocation inventory, what you're doing is you're looking at all your cash and invested assets and putting them in the proper asset class. So we created templates back in the day when I was at Rutgers. I actually had 3 hours with a tech guy in the computer lab, one-on-one. And he said, what do you want to do, Barb? And I said, I want to create Excel templates. So we've had these on our website at Rutgers for, years, decades actually. So what we did is we put placeholders in where people would fill in what their cash assets are. So maybe you'd have Wells Fargo Bank, for example. Under fixed income, you might have I-bonds, for example. Under equity assets, you might have an index fund. So you're going to fill in the specific names of the investments in that particular cell. And then, of course, you've got the dollar amount, and then you get the fourth column is totaling the dollar amount for each asset category, so the total amount for cash and fixed income and equity assets. And then the last column is where you look at the percentage, so that you can see what percentage of your total portfolio is in the different asset classes. So this is an activity that's going to take you a while because you're going to need to be pulling from a lot of documents. You're going to need to get current values on all of your assets. You're going to actually have to do the net worth first, so that's going to take some time. And then you're going to be taking the information from the net worth statement and putting it into the asset allocation inventory. But this is really important because you want to see how your assets are performing and if there's been any kind of shifting in values. We're going to talk about rebalancing later as another task to think about doing. You're going to need to see what the asset allocation weightings are. Okay, here's another one that's really important, an automatic payments inventory. How many of you have that? How many of you have a list of all the payments that you make automatically and where they're charged to? Whether they come out of a credit card or a bank account. A lot of people don't have this. And this can be really hard, particularly if you're having to step in to manage somebody's estate or power of attorney situations, things of that sort. So it's a really good thing to do. So I set mine up basically just with subheadings. So we have bills that are charged to our checking account, because some of the utilities in the area where I live, they don't want to have bills paid with a credit card, rightly so. They don't want to pay the merchant's fee. So they get charged to the checking account. But of course, we want to charge as much as we can to credit cards so we can build up those reward points, right? So we've got all of the expenses, and I have some bills that are charged monthly, like the water bill and the electric bill, and then I have things that are charged yearly, and I have like an alternate one between my website and my domain name for my website. So those are things that come once a year. My Zoom license is once a year. So what I did under the subheadings for where the bills are being charged to is I have the name of the vendor, the amount of the payment. If it's fixed, you can write the fixed amount. If it varies, I just write varies because it's going to be variable, like my water bill. It's not going to be the same every month. The approximate due date. So many of them are set to, automatically debit on like the 5th of the month or the 14th of the month, something like that. And then the phone number and the email for the vendor. So I have a really quick list of everything that's being automated, so I know exactly who's paying where. And this is important because sometimes things happen. For example, have any of you ever had a credit card have a funny expense on it, and then you had to report it to the credit card company, and what did they do? They issue a new credit card, right? Or if you want to change banks or something like that. So you need to know where all of these things are being charged to if you have to make any changes or if changes are made as a result of something happening. Okay, now we're into the B's. So we got beneficiary designations review. So there's a document on the Rutgers Cooperative Extension website, and there's a lot of links in these slides, so you'll be able to click on the links from the slides that are in the platform for the conference. So this is where you review financial documents that have beneficiary designations. So we're talking about retirement savings accounts, IRAs, 401ks, life insurance also has beneficiary designations, annuities, things of that sort. And what you're going to do on this worksheet is just identify who the beneficiaries are. There's also a section on this worksheet for personal representatives. So this is where you're going to identify who's the executor of somebody's estate or trustees of a trust or something of that sort. It's also a good idea to have contingent beneficiaries. So there's a space on the worksheet to list those as well. So many people just have no idea. They've never pulled all this information in one place. So this activity kind of forces clients to look at these documents, which maybe they haven't looked at in years. And who knows, there might be an ex-spouse that's still beneficiary of one of their accounts. You got to take a look at this. So it's a really good document to get this information down all in one place. So all of the accounts that have beneficiaries and all of the different documents that have personal representatives, you have everything listed in one document for easy reference. Okay, another one is charitable gifting inventory. So I recommend to people that you have a charitable gifting plan. So I taught this class like back in March, so 2024 was, pretty much hadn't really unfolded very much yet. But now as we're getting close to 2025, people could be thinking about, okay, where do I want to give my money this year? So I have spaces for the A charities. They would be your highest priority for gifting, and then your B's and your C's. And actually make a budget for each of those charities. How much are you going to give each charity, and what is your total charity gifting budget? And then for people who are looking beyond just the standard, giving some cash or writing a check kind of thing, other strategies that people can look into for charitable gifting would be bunching. If somebody wants to pursue a bunching strategy for taxes and try to get as many deductions as possible so they can exceed the standard deduction and be able to itemize, that takes a lot of planning. And in many cases, it also takes a lot of charitable gifting to do that because there aren't that many itemized deductions that you can take. So that might be something that somebody would like to plan ahead. Maybe a donor advised fund. Somebody might be thinking about using that for part of their charitable gifting, where you set that up with like a custodian, like a Fidelity, a Vanguard, a Schwab, and you set up a donor advised fund, fund that, get the tax deduction for your contribution to the donor advised fund, and then make your charitable gifts out of that. And then for people who are 70.5, There's also qualified charitable distributions, or QCDs. That's another way that they can make a charitable contribution. So this form is also on the Rutgers website. Another task that's really a good thing to do during spring cleaning is just consolidating accounts, just identifying assets that can be consolidated. I gave the example in my class for older adults that when people who are now in their 60s and 70s were younger, back in 1982, IRAs became universal for all workers. So we've had IRAs now for about 42 years. And back in the day when they were brand new, every bank in Sussex County, New Jersey, where I lived, was giving out an appliance for opening an IRA because they were brand new and they wanted the business. So you could furnish your whole kitchen. You know, one could give you a blender and the other one would give you a toaster. And well, you know, I said to this class of older adults, you know, okay, fast forward 40 years, you've got like 5 IRAs. And maybe it's the time to simplify and consolidate, particularly before people have to start taking out RMDs, you know, required minimum distributions, or simply just to simplify the record keeping, you know, fewer statements, fewer, you know, things at tax time, all of that. And some of these accounts have fees attached to them, you know, custodial fees, so you want to reduce those as well. So just kind of consolidating, you know, mutual funds, perhaps. Some of them have overlapping objectives. You don't really have to have 3 growth index funds, for example, or 5 IRAs. And of course, what you want to do is close the ones that have the highest expense ratios or the lowest returns. I mean, who wants to have a 0.5% interest on savings accounts when we know there's so many better alternatives with higher yields? So consolidation. Credit card inventory. So how many of you have a credit card inventory where you have a list of all your credit cards and the account numbers? Okay, this is homework for you. I didn't see too many hands up. So what you want to do here is make a list of all the credit cards that you have, or some people prefer to plunk them down on a copy machine if they don't want to write out the numbers. That's fine too. Have the name of the credit card, the account number, the expiration date, the 3-digit code, and the toll-free number for customer service. And that way, you know, if your credit card is lost or stolen, you have all the pertinent information to be able to call customer service and say, hey, you know, we've got to put a stop on my credit card. Same thing for debit cards, too. You want to include those on the list, too, because it's actually even more important with a debit card because they have access to the balance in your checking account if your card gets lost. So just having an inventory is something to do. And again, this is going to take a little time. These are the things that people want to set aside a couple of hours, maybe an afternoon to do. Credit report and score check. I see older adults all the time. I ask them, you know, have you checked your credit report? They look at me and say, oh, I don't do that anymore, or I never did that. And credit score is the same thing. So we all know that you can get a free credit report from each of the big 3 credit reporting agencies. Now you could do it every week if you wanted to. You know, that rule that they put in place for COVID was never lifted. So you can actually check credit reports every week through annualcreditreport.com. And some people like to do it online. I prefer to do that because it's quick and easy, but some people like to mail in the form that's shown on the slide there. As far as the credit scores, most people will need to get those through another venue because they're not mandated by law to be free, but there's a lot of places where people can get free credit scores. They're banks, credit card companies, some of the apps that are out there, they'll give you free credit scores. So there's no shortage of places to get a free credit score. So at least once a year, people should be checking their credit reports and scores. And then debt acceleration plans. So of course we've all heard about PowerPay, and they've got, you know, an exhibit over there. So just helping clients think about, okay, maybe it's time to have some kind of plan, and then taking the time to make the plan. So if it means going on PowerPay and they have 10 creditors, for example, it's going to take some time to input that data. And then working with clients to decide whether they want to do the avalanche or the snowball. You know, do they want to go highest interest rate first? Or do they want to kind of knock off the smallest balances and do those first, and maybe comparing the scenarios? So that's another thing that people can do that can help with their finances. And here's a real important one, is digital assets inventory. I actually did a session on this last year. And, you know, it's interesting because I then, 2 months after I did that presentation, my brother passed. And I was the only surviving relative in the family. And my brother had told me he did a digital assets inventory. I sent them the form from Rutgers. I said, fill this out or use it as a template. And he did. But the problem was he didn't get it to anybody, you know. And I said that last year to the group. I said, if you're going to do this digital assets inventory and write down the usernames and passwords for all of your accounts, make sure you share it with somebody. And unfortunately, my brother got a very aggressive form of cancer, and he thought he was going to be able to just fly down to Florida after having chemo on a plane, and he didn't make it. So he never got to tell us where the digital assets inventory was. But we did find it. A lot of sleuthing. It took us 3 months, and we finally found it on a G drive. We couldn't find it anywhere else. But I can tell you from the experience of trying to close accounts without a digital assets inventory, it is really hard, particularly because some of his social media was related to his business and his website company, and they wanted the business and corporation papers, and we couldn't find them. And then when we finally found the G drive and we got the inventory, we just logged in as him and closed all the social accounts. It was easy peasy. So my word of advice is prepare the inventory and share it with trusted people. I asked my brother, I said, can you put it up in the Dropbox? He said, oh, no, I don't trust the Chinese hackers. And then I said, okay, can you mail it to me, FedEx? Yeah. Oh, no, it's going to get lost in the mail. And so it never got to us, and it was a very stressful time. So make it and share it. Speaking of estate planning, one of the things that needs to be done occasionally is to review and revise estate planning documents. So related to my brother's death, I had to change 2 of my documents. He was a beneficiary in my will, and he was also my Plan B healthcare proxy for my living will. So I got my cousin. I asked my cousin to stand in as my Plan B. My husband is my Plan A, of course. But I needed to make some changes to my documents because of the death of my brother. So those are the kinds of situations where you also are prompted to make changes, you know, either in personal representatives or beneficiaries, and then having contingencies for those positions as well, because those things can change. Or sometimes people want to change the amounts of their requests for various reasons. So just reviewing the documents periodically and making sure that they still reflect your wishes going forward. Financial goals update. So just kind of touching base with clients or having clients kind of do a review for themselves of how are they doing toward their goals. Maybe they started out with a bucket list that was kind of a vague, kind of generalized kind of goal, like I want to have a comfortable retirement. And then you got them to kind of break it down into something a little bit more specific that they're saving for. Or maybe it's a new car, or whatever it is. Just helping clients write those SMART goals, and then periodically assessing their progress. Like if they want to save $10,000 in 4 years, they should have $2,500 saved at the end of year 1. So just kind of keeping up to date with progress toward goals. Either saving for them, or what I find with the older adults that I work with is they often have the money. Spending it down is sometimes an issue. I mean, I wrote a whole, that's what my book is about, is flipping those switches from, and the first one in the first chapter in the book is from saving to spending. That can be a real hard switch for people to flip. So older adults maybe have the money. It's just a matter of planning when they want to take the trip and spend it down. For people who need to save up, they need to have a plan to be able to do that. And then there's financial inventories. How many of you have this for yourself? Kind of a document that has all your financial information. It could be a flash drive. It doesn't have to be a document. It could be a collection of files that are saved in a zip file. Any of you have that kind of thing? Okay. Good news is that there are dozens, I mean dozens, mega dozens of financial inventory forms. If you just Google those 3 words, you'll find dozens of downloadable forms. Insurance companies have them, brokerage firms have them, cooperative extension has them. I mean, financial advisors. I mean, the sources are all over the place. So what you see on the picture there and the link is the one that we have at Rutgers Cooperative Extension. And it's 4 pages, and it has spaces to list. Well, you can see the front page there is where you'd have the name, and you'd also have, it's a good idea to date it too. I don't know if it has a space for dating. I would recommend doing that too. And then the names of advisors, insurance policies, retirement savings plans. I mean, all of the things that you need to know, contents of the safe deposit box. It just walks you through all the different information that you record. And just like the digital assets inventory, you want to share this. You want to make sure that you have family members that you trust, or executors, people that are trusted people in your life, that they have a copy of this information to be able to use it should the need arise. Okay, here's another one. Home improvement inventory. How many of you have an inventory of all the home improvements that you've made to your house? Okay, I don't see too many hands there. Okay, so I imagine for a lot of you, you don't have these records saved, but the next best thing, plan B, is to try to reconstruct your records. So I was teaching this in my community, and one of the students in my class, an older gentleman, said, "Oh, I've made so many improvements to my house, but I don't have any records. What do I do?" I said, well, one thing you might want to check is your we have these architectural review committees in an HOA. Like, you can't do anything to your house unless it passes muster. And in order to do the ARC application for approval, you have to submit all of the documents from the contractor. They need to see what the work is going to be, and of course it usually has the price on it as well. I said, maybe you can just reconstruct that way. Even pictures can help, before and after pictures. Like in Florida, people like bird cages, in the back, the screen, screen enclosures. And so just having a picture of the house before you put the bird cage in and after, anything you can do to reconstruct the fact that you made improvements to your house. So why do you need to do this? Well, that capital gains exclusion for the gains on a house, that's not indexed for inflation. That's been out there now for 20-some years. And, it's $250,000 for a single person, $500,000 for a married couple filing jointly. But it's eroding every year because it's not indexed with the CPI like a lot of things in tax code are. And of course, what also has happened is home values have increased rapidly in the last couple years. They've gone up in value. I know my house is worth probably 160% of what we paid for it 5 years ago. So, pretty big increase in the value of homes, at least currently. So the thing is, if your home has gone up in value, you want to make sure that you bring the basis in your house up to as high as it can be. And the basis for the capital gains tax calculation is what you paid for the house, plus all the improvements that you made to it. And improvements, I mean something that stays with the structure, not a home maintenance kind of thing. It has to be, some type of improvement, landscaping, pools, decks, that kind of thing, fireplaces. So you want to make sure that you can add all of those things to the purchase price so that you don't get charged for capital gains, on the house if there's a great amount of growth. The other thing to keep in mind, if you didn't know this, is that if you have a married couple filing jointly, and obviously there's a widowed person, they will only get the $250,000 if they're widowed if they do not sell within 2 years of the spouse's death. So they have 2 years after the death of their spouse to get the $500,000 that a married couple filing jointly would get. After that, they revert back down to the capital gains exemption for a single taxpayer. Okay, income tax review. So I just taught a class in my community on year-end tax planning, and one of the things that I suggested to my students is that they have, they do what I call a pro forma tax return. In other words, a projected tax return for 2024, but do it now. And I like to use, if any of you belong to AAII, the American Association of Individual Investors, I think it's well worth it, for $49 a year, that you get a monthly journal every month, a lot of research-based articles, and then their December issue is their tax issue. And they always have a really nice tax forecasting form that you can use for the following year to do your projected tax return. If you don't have that, you can just dig out your 2023 tax return and have a piece of paper lined up with it, and then go line by line for each number that you had in 2023. What do you think the number will be in 2024? And try to do a projection, the best you can. By this time, you have a pretty good idea what your income is going to be for the rest of the year, and you probably have a pretty good idea of lots of other things that relate to your taxes, like investment income and things like that. So what you want to do with the income tax review is just look at anticipated changes in your income versus last year. Look at the tax withholding versus last year. Are you going to be sufficiently withheld, or do you need to kind of bump it up a little bit before the end of the year? Looking at investment gains and losses, maybe strategizing some charitable contributions, some of those strategies I mentioned before. Organizing your records, for income or tax credits. Some people are getting tax credits for home improvements or EVs or something like that. Looking at your retirement account distributions, and then also trying to make sure that you avoid the tax traps. So the three that I talked about in my class, well, for older adults, the tax on Social Security, and also IRMA, the higher surcharge that you pay for Medicare. About 8% of people on Medicare get subject to IRMA because they have a high enough income that they trigger that. And then one that can affect people at all ages is the net investment income tax. So what you want to try to do is project ahead and stay under the trigger points for those. For the example, the net investment income tax, it's $200,000 for a single taxpayer and $250,000 for a couple filing jointly. Okay, another thing is an insurance coverage and cost review. So, we all know that insurance has been going up, homeowners insurance, vehicle insurance. So just scheduling an annual review with your insurance agent just to discuss policy updates, coverage options, discounts, make sure you're getting all of your discounts, asking about ways to lower your premiums without sacrificing adequate coverage. In my community, a lot of people have been kind of outraged because of, Florida has some pretty high insurance these days. And the three places that I see a lot of my neighbors shopping around are AAA, USAA, if they have a military connection, and actually Farm Bureau, too. So there may be some other places as well. But again, shopping around periodically to make sure that maybe you can get a better deal with a different company. And of course, considering umbrella insurance and just organizing your policy documents so that you have them kind of organized. So if you have to refer to your policy, you can get to it easily. What I did, because I'm in the process of shopping around my insurance, is I just made a PDF of all of the declarations pages for all of my insurance policies, and that's really easy to send it to a competing agent and have them give you a bid for the price. Speaking of negotiating bills, that's something that people might want to do too as a kind of a periodic spring cleaning activity, is just try to negotiate some of their bills and interest rates. So the key thing to remember about negotiation is you never want to ask a question that has a yes, no answer. Like, will you lower my interest rate? Because what are they going to say? No, right? So you want to ask questions to start a conversation. So what flexibility is there on the price? What discounts are available? What are your special rates for loyal customers like me? I've been shopping around. What is your policy to match another vendor or another credit card company, whatever it is? What steps can we make or take to make this purchase more affordable? Different questions like that. I already mentioned net worth as being kind of the springboard to doing the asset allocation calculation. So net worth, of course, we all know is assets minus debt. So all I want to say here is that if you're looking for some tools to do this, go to the Rutgers Cooperative Extension website. We have the paper and pencil form that looks like what you see on the slide. And then we also have the Excel template for net worth as well. We have templates for asset allocation, spending plan, and then the net worth calculation as well. So you just download those files and you put them on your computer and do the calculations with Excel. Saves you from having to do all the math. Okay, another spring cleaning activity is just to organize documents. So sometimes people just don't have really good records. So some of the things that people might consider as part of this task would be, looking at the security of their documents. Do they have a file that's lockable, or a cabinet, or a safe, wherever they're going to be putting things? Is it fireproof and waterproof? Some people like accordion files, or hanging files, or file folders. Some people may decide they want to kind of digitize as much as possible, so maybe just having a scanner to eliminate some of the paper and then just go digital and have the scanned copies. Or an external hard drive. It's always good to have a digital backup, not just have documents, electronically in one computer, but have them either up in the cloud or on an external hard drive, whatever works for somebody. Having a shredder is good to have handy because you're going to be shredding some documents as you digitize them. And then creating what I call a financial notebook, which is just kind of a repository. It doesn't have to be a notebook. It could be an accordion file, but just one place. It could be one file, one drawer of a file cabinet, for example. That's pretty much what I do. Just have everything in one place so that it's all organized. Not only for you, but for trusted people who may have to step in, if you're incapacitated or your clients are. And then also it's a good idea to have an inventory of the safe deposit box. Know what's in your safe deposit box. Actually, what I do personally is I have copies of everything that's in my safe deposit box in my locked file cabinet at home. But I have an inventory of what's there if I need it. Speaking of inventories, we've got the personal property inventory. So there's dozens of forms for this as well. Insurance companies primarily have these available online. So I found this one actually through a government agency, and it's just what it implies. You're just listing all the personal property that you have. Maybe if you have documents, you could write down the original cost, but of course, when it comes to claiming on policies, it's often not what you paid for it, but what it's worth at this time, depreciated value. So just getting a list of everything that you own. If it's electronics, having the serial numbers, just so you have complete documentation on your property in case there's a loss. And then we go to purging and shredding. So purging, some things that would fall into that category would be if you have stuff, unneeded items, either donate them, sell them, or gift them. That can be an afternoon activity for sure. People start going through their closets and their cabinets and finding things. Also purging financially, so closing accounts that have high fees, making sure you don't have any mutual funds with 12B1 fees, for example, or bank accounts that, have very low rates of return, APYs. You're going to try to purge those. And I already mentioned consolidation. And also another thing people can look at is recurring expenses that they're paying that they're not getting a lot of value for. For example, when I worked at Rutgers in New Jersey, I had a 3-hour commute. So satellite radio was kind of fun to have because I was driving in the car for a long distance. Now I have a 3-second commute. I go from my kitchen to my office at home. I don't use satellite radio very much, so I discontinued that subscription because it just didn't add any more value. So things like that. And then, of course, shredding. That's another way of purging. They typically say 6 years. If you want, I go 7. I do the current tax year and 6 years prior that I hold on to. Beyond that, you probably don't need to have any tax records, with the exception of capital assets. Your house, I already mentioned, stocks. You want to keep those records for as long as you hold that asset, plus 6 or 7 years. Otherwise, you can, start shredding some of those old records. Another thing that people sometimes forget about is just doing a reward and gift card review. So periodically just checking statements to see what rewards you have built up. So I happened to catch a little bit of a Twitter chat yesterday that was holiday expenses, and one of the questions that they put out is how do you pay for your holiday expenses? And somebody tweeted that they just use their points, their cash value points, and that becomes their Christmas club, for example. So it's kind of like free money. They don't even have to use any of their money to pay for Christmas expenses because they're getting it from their cashback rewards. So just reviewing them periodically, because depending on the rewards program, some of them have expiration dates. If you don't use your points or your cash within a certain period of time, it could drop off. Also, a lot of people have gift cards scattered around. They have some in their house, they have some in their car, just trying to get those all in one place and use them up. And again, like I said, checking for expiration dates. For older clients, an RMD withdrawal plan. So we all know that RMDs start taking effect now under current tax law as a result of Secure 2.0 at age 73 for people born 1951 to 59, and age 75 for people born in 1960 and later. So I come across a lot of older adults that ask me, well, what do I do with the money? So I say you can spend it, you can gift it, or you can resave it. So I developed this worksheet just to help people make a plan for what do they do with their money. So there's a space to list the balance that was on December 31st of the previous year, and then they look up the divisor in the IRS chart, and then they figure out that a certain amount of it is going to be withheld. Most of the vendors use 20% as a default withholding rate when people take out their withdrawal. And then there's lines for spending, gifting, or resaving. So you make a plan. Rule of 3 comparisons. So this is a worksheet that I developed where people just make a comparison of 3 different vendors for a product or service that they're looking at. So the first thing that you do is decide on your criteria. What is it that you're looking for? Are you looking for convenience? Are you looking at price? What are the things that are kind of the deal breakers in your decision? And then you get the information from 3 vendors and you make a side-by-side comparison. So that's an activity that can take a couple hours for sure because you're going to be shopping around. And then a spending plan, aka a budget. So all I need to say there really is that I love this worksheet because it's one of few budgeting worksheets that includes occasional expenses. And then, of course, you can add up the total amount and break them down into monthly expenses. So 1/12 of the amount that you would pay during the year, you could treat it as a monthly expense, but in reality, it's an expense that maybe you pay 2 or 3 or 4 times a year. And then the last one on my list, T, is 2-factor authentication. So I talked about this last year in my digital assets workshop when I talked about the fact that if you're going to go through the process of doing the digital assets inventory, at the same time as you're logging into all of your accounts to be able to write down the username and password, make sure that you're putting 2-factor authentication on the very sensitive accounts that you hold, all of your financial accounts, bank accounts, investment accounts, pension, retirement accounts, you name it, anything like that. I do want to say one thing about two-factor authentication. I've heard some horror stories in my community, so I'm going to pass this along, and we almost made the mistake with my brother's cell phone as well. When you're doing your digital assets inventory, whether you do it on a computer filling in spaces or you do the worksheet and write it out, take a highlighter or a computer highlighter and highlight all of the accounts in your digital assets inventory that have 2FA on them. I've heard some horror stories in my community about surviving spouses, rightly so, want to cut expenses, so they call Verizon or whoever and say, we don't have the cell phone anymore, we're going to cut the service so I can save some money, only to find out a month later that they try to access an account and it's tied to 2FA on the phone that they just canceled the service plan for. So make sure you're highlighting on your digital assets inventory anything has 2FA. So 2FA means that you have to go through another barrier in order to access the account beyond the username and password. So it could be security questions. Often it's the texted code, so that's where I was talking with the cell phone. Sometimes it's an email, but it depends on how you set it up. Sometimes it's also biometric data. And that's a real sticky one, because if it's based on fingerprints and facial recognition and the person has passed, I recommend that you have a backup way, because, again, you need to have another way to be able to access that. So, again, this can take some time, too, just going through your accounts and making sure you set up 2FA. So I would just say that when I taught this class the first time, people loved it. They came up to me afterwards and they said they were going to make some changes, and I felt really good about that they felt that the information was useful, and a lot of them hadn't been doing some of the things that I suggested. So I'll just leave it here, and I think we have like 1 or 2 minutes. I want to thank you for attending. What I would just say is I'm a Jersey girl, and we're famous for our diners. And you go into the diner, the menu is huge. You can't do everything. You can't eat everything. So this class is like that. I always tell my students, just pick and choose. Pick of these 25 strategies, pick a couple activities that really resonate with you, get started there, and then work your way down the list when you have time. So thank you. Any questions? Okay. Thank you for coming.